Welcome to this journey into the frozen edges of our planet. The tale of the first human to stand at Earth's southernmost point. Settle in as we rewind time to an era when daring explorers pushed into the unknown with nothing but determination, grit, and a relentless drive to discover what lay beyond the horizon. Let your mind drift with the creak of wooden sledges, the howl of Antarctic winds, and the quiet courage that shaped one of history's most extraordinary achievements. If you enjoy stories like this, remember to hit the like button and subscribe for more adventures. In the early years of the 20th century, when the world still held places untouched by human feet, two great frozen wildernesses remained as the final frontiers of earthly exploration. The North Pole and the South Pole stood as symbols of the ultimate challenge, places so remote and hostile that merely reaching them seemed an almost superhuman achievement. By 1911, the race for the South Pole had captured the imagination of the world, and two expeditions were poised to write their names into history. One was led by the experienced Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, the other by the British naval officer Robert Falcon Scott. This is the story of Amundsen's journey, a tale of meticulous planning, unwavering determination, and the triumph of a man who understood that in the harshest environment on Earth, preparation and respect for nature would mean the difference between success and tragedy. Roald Engelbrekt Gravning Amundsen was born in 1872 in Borge, a small town southeast of Oslo, Norway. He grew up in a family of shipowners and sea captains, surrounded by stories of maritime adventure. From his earliest years, young Roald dreamed of exploration, inspired by the tales of Arctic expeditions he read with fervent interest. When he was 15, he read about the ill-fated Franklin expedition, which had disappeared while searching for the Northwest Passage decades earlier. Rather than being deterred by this tragedy, Amundsen found himself oddly inspired. He was drawn not to the romance of exploration alone, but to the challenge of survival in the most unforgiving places on Earth. His mother wished for him to become a doctor, and dutiful son that he was, Amundsen enrolled in medical studies to please her. But his heart was never in it. When his mother passed away in 1893, Amundsen, then 21 years old, immediately abandoned his medical studies. He was finally free to pursue his true calling. He knew that to become a polar explorer, he would need to be more than just brave. He would need to be skilled, experienced, and extraordinarily tough. So he set about preparing himself with characteristic thoroughness. Amundsen joined various Arctic expeditions to gain experience. He worked as a sailor, learning every aspect of seamanship. He studied under the great Norwegian polar explorer Fridtjof Nansen, absorbing everything he could about Arctic survival. Most importantly, he spent time with the Inuit people of the Arctic, learning their techniques for survival in extreme cold. From them, he learned about proper clothing, about dog sledding, about the construction of snow shelters, and about the crucial importance of fresh meat in preventing scurvy. By the early 1900s, Amundsen had already achieved a significant milestone. Between 1903 and 1906, he had successfully navigated the Northwest Passage, the sea route through the Arctic connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, a feat that had eluded explorers for centuries. But Amundsen's ambitions reached further still. He set his sights on the North Pole, planning to drift across it in Nansen's famous ship, the Fram, which had been specially designed to withstand the crushing pressure of polar ice. Then, in September 1909, news reached Amundsen that shook his plans to their foundation. Two explorers, Frederick Cook and Robert Peary, both claimed to have reached the North Pole. Regardless of the controversy surrounding their claims, Amundsen realized that the North Pole as a goal had lost its allure. The prize, in the eyes of the world, had been claimed. He needed a new objective, and he needed it quickly. His expedition was already being organized. Funds had been raised, and the Fram was being prepared. It was then that Amundsen made a decision that would prove both controversial and brilliant. He would go south instead of north. He would race to be the first man to stand at the South Pole. There was just one problem. A well-funded British expedition, led by Robert Falcon Scott, was already preparing for the same goal. Amundsen made a choice that would later draw criticism. He kept his change of plans secret from almost everyone, including his crew, his backers, and certainly from Scott. Only when the Fram was well underway did he gather his men and tell them of their true destination. To their credit, every single man agreed to continue. He sent a telegram to Scott when the Fram reached Madeira. The telegram was brief and to the point. Beg leave to inform you, Fram proceeding Antarctic. Amundsen. The race was on. The Fram sailed from Norway on the 3rd of June, 1910. On board were 19 men and 97 Greenland sledge dogs. The dogs were key to Amundsen's strategy. He had learned from the Inuit that dogs were far superior to other methods of polar transport. They were efficient. They could survive on seal and penguin meat, and when necessary, they could even be used as food themselves. This last point was brutally pragmatic, but Amundsen was nothing if not pragmatic. He understood that in the Antarctic, sentimentality could cost lives. The voyage south took months. In January 1911, the ship encountered the ice shelf that guards Antarctica, that immense barrier of ice that towers over the sea, stretching for hundreds of miles along the continent's coast. Amundsen chose to establish his base camp at the Bay of Whales, on the Ross Ice Shelf. This location was 60 miles closer to the pole than Scott's chosen base. In the Antarctic, where every mile had to be fought for against cold, wind, and exhaustion, 60 miles represented a significant advantage. The men established their base camp, which they named Framheim, meaning home of the Fram. It was a prefabricated wooden hut they had brought with them, and they assembled it quickly on the ice. Around it, they built supply depots dug into the snow, storerooms for their equipment, and shelters for the dogs. Everything was done with meticulous organization. Amundsen was obsessive about preparation. Every piece of equipment was carefully considered and tested. Every detail of the journey ahead was planned and replanned. As the brief Antarctic summer faded into the long darkness of winter, the men settled into Framheim for the months ahead. The polar winter is a strange time. The sun disappears below the horizon and does not return for months. Temperatures plummet to levels that are difficult to truly comprehend. The wind howls across the ice with relentless fury. Inside their hut, the men created a comfortable world. They had plenty of food, books, and games, and each other's company. Amundsen fostered a spirit of camaraderie among his men. Everyone shared the work, everyone shared the living space, and everyone was working toward the same goal. During those winter months, the men made several important journeys. They established supply depots along the route they planned to take to the pole, traveling south in the brutal cold to leave caches of food and fuel at specific points marked with flags. This was crucial to Amundsen's plan. By establishing depots, they could travel lighter and faster, replenishing their supplies at predetermined points. Amundsen also spent the winter months refining their equipment, reducing weight, modifying clothing, checking and rechecking supplies. Nothing was left to chance. Finally, on the 20th of October, 1911, the real journey began. Amundsen selected 4 men to accompany him to the pole. They were Olaf Bjaaland, an expert skier, Helmer Hansen, the best dog driver, Severi Hassel, another skilled handler, and Oscar Wisting, a naval petty officer. The 5 men set out with 4 sledges and 52 dogs. They wore carefully designed clothing, fur anoraks, and reindeer skin sleeping bags, designed to keep them warm in the extreme cold. They carried food carefully calculated to provide maximum nutrition with minimum weight. The first part of the journey was across the relatively flat ice shelf. The men and dogs moved with practiced efficiency, covering good distances each day. They followed the markers they had left during their depot-laying trips, finding each cache of supplies exactly where it should be. The weather was reasonably good, and spirits were high. On the 17th of November, after nearly a month of travel, they reached the foot of the Transantarctic Mountains. Before them rose a chaotic landscape of glaciers, crevasses, and ice falls. Amundsen had chosen to ascend via a glacier he named the Axel Heiberg, after one of his Norwegian supporters. It was a gamble. No one had ever explored this glacier before. It might be impassable, but if it was viable, it would save them distance. The ascent of the Axel Heiberg Glacier took 4 days and was one of the most difficult parts of the entire expedition. The glacier was steep and broken, filled with crevasses, hidden beneath thin bridges of snow. The dogs struggled to pull the sledges up the incline. Several times, the men had to unload the sledges and relay supplies, going back and forth multiple times to get everything up particularly steep sections. There were moments of genuine danger. Crevasses opened suddenly beneath their feet, but they pressed on, driven by determination and by Amundsen's steady leadership. On the 21st of November, they reached the top of the glacier and emerged onto the polar plateau. Before them stretched an endless expanse of white, flat, and featureless, extending to the horizon in every direction. They were now at an altitude of over 3,000 meters above sea level, standing on what is essentially a vast desert of ice that covers the interior of Antarctica. The air was thin and cold, but the worst of the terrain was behind them. From here to the pole, it would be a matter of endurance and navigation. With lighter sledges and stronger remaining dogs, they pushed south across the plateau. Day after day, they maintained a steady pace, covering 15 to 20 miles each day. The landscape was hypnotically monotonous. There were no landmarks, no features to distinguish one mile from another. Just endless white in every direction, beneath an endless pale blue sky. The sun circled around them, never setting in the perpetual daylight of the Antarctic summer. They navigated by compass and by careful dead reckoning, checking and rechecking their position. The weather on the plateau was capricious. Some days were clear and calm, allowing them to make good progress. Other days brought blizzards that reduced visibility to nothing and forced them to remain in their tents, huddled in their sleeping bags while the wind screamed outside. During these storms, they could do nothing but wait, conserving their energy and their supplies, hoping the weather would clear. On the 4th of December, they passed 88 degrees south. They were now further south than any human had ever been. Shackleton's record was behind them. Only 120 miles remained to the pole. The final days of the journey were marked by intense focus. They rose each morning in the cold darkness of the tent, lit their Primus stove, melted snow for water, ate their breakfast, and then packed their gear with practiced efficiency. The routine never varied. Everything had its place. On the 13th of December, 1911, they took their final observations and confirmed their position. They were at 89 degrees 55 minutes south, only 5 miles from the pole. That night, they barely slept. The next morning, the 14th of December, they set out early. The sky was clear, the visibility perfect. They skied south across the ice, every man knowing that this was the culmination of years of planning, months of travel, and uncounted hardships. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they reached their goal, the South Pole. Amundsen took careful observations with his sextant, confirming their position. There was no physical marker at the pole, no mountain or landmark. It was simply a point on the endless ice, indistinguishable from the ice surrounding it in every direction. But it was the bottom of the world, the southernmost point on Earth, and they were the first humans to stand there. The 5 men raised the Norwegian flag, which Helmer Hansen had carried for the final miles of the journey. They planted it in the ice and stood around it, 5 bearded, frost-burnt men in a landscape of absolute desolation, claiming this frozen place for Norway. They took photographs, though in the extreme cold, the camera was difficult to operate. They shook hands, rather formally, as was the Norwegian way. There was satisfaction, but little jubilation. They were experienced enough to know that reaching the pole was only half the journey. They still had to get back alive. They remained at the pole for 3 days, taking observations from different positions to ensure they had indeed reached 90 degrees south. They erected a small tent, inside which they left a letter addressed to the Norwegian king and another letter addressed to Robert Scott, asking him to forward the first letter if he should reach the pole and find it. Then they turned north and began their return journey. The journey back to Framheim took 39 days. They retraced their route across the polar plateau, descended the Axel Heiberg Glacier, and crossed the Ross ice shelf. They found all their depots exactly where they had left them, marked with their flags. The weather was generally favorable, and the men were in good spirits, knowing that every mile brought them closer to safety and success. On the 25th of January, 1912, they arrived back at Framheim. They had been gone for 99 days and had traveled a total of nearly 1,900 miles. Not a single man had been lost. Not a single man had suffered serious injury. It was a triumph not just of courage and endurance, but of planning and preparation. The men who had remained at Framheim greeted them with joy and relief. Amundsen permitted himself a small satisfaction. He had achieved what he set out to do. He was the first man to reach the South Pole. The Fram left Antarctica on the 30th of January, and after a long voyage north, arrived in Hobart, Tasmania, on the 7th of March, 1912. From there, Amundsen sent his telegram announcing their success. The news spread around the world. Amundsen was celebrated as a hero in Norway and across Europe. but the celebration was tempered by the growing anxiety about Robert Scott's expedition. When news finally reached civilization months later, it was devastating. Scott and his 4 companions had reached the South Pole on the 17th of January, 34 days after Amundsen, only to find the Norwegian flag already planted there. Heartbroken and exhausted, they had begun their return journey, but weakened by cold, hunger, and scurvy, they had died on the Ross ice shelf, just 11 miles from a depot that could have saved them. The tragedy of Scott's expedition cast a shadow over Amundsen's achievement. In Britain particularly, there was a feeling that Scott was the true hero, a man who had given his life in noble pursuit, while Amundsen was merely efficient. This narrative persisted for decades, and in many ways, Amundsen's reputation suffered for it. But this judgment, perhaps, misses the essential truth of polar exploration. The Antarctic is not a place that rewards romanticism or values noble failure. It is an environment of absolute hostility, where the smallest mistake can be fatal, and where survival depends on preparation, skill, and sound judgment. Amundsen understood this. He had learned from the Inuit, from Nansen, and from his own years of experience that success in the polar regions came from respecting the environment, from planning meticulously, and from making difficult decisions without hesitation. His choice to use dogs rather than ponies proved crucial. His choice to start earlier in the season gave him better weather. His decision to establish depots closer together meant his men were never as far from supplies as Scott's were. His insistence on skiing rather than man-hauling sledges meant his team expended far less energy. Every choice Amundsen made was designed to maximize efficiency and minimize risk. After his triumph at the South Pole, Amundsen's life continued to be one of exploration and adventure, though not without difficulties. In 1928, Amundsen disappeared while flying a rescue mission to search for a crashed airship in the Arctic. He was 55 years old. His plane vanished into the Arctic wastes, and neither he nor his crew were ever found. It was a fitting, if tragic, end for a man who had devoted his life to the polar regions. He died as he had lived, in the cold and the ice, pursuing adventure to the very end. The story of Amundsen's expedition to the South Pole remains, more than a century later, a testament to what human beings can achieve through careful planning, determination, and skill. It was not a story of miraculous survival against impossible odds. It was not a story of tragic heroism and noble failure. It was a story of a man who decided to do something extraordinarily difficult, who prepared thoroughly for every challenge he would face, who led his men with competence and confidence, and who succeeded in his goal through professionalism and expertise. In the modern world, where so much of the Earth has been explored and mapped, it is difficult to fully appreciate what Amundsen achieved. He traveled to a place that was completely unknown, where no human had ever been, where the conditions were hostile beyond imagination, and where a mistake could mean death with no hope of rescue. He navigated across featureless ice, using only a compass and sextant. He endured months of cold so extreme it can freeze exposed flesh in seconds. As we drift towards sleep, we might imagine those 5 men on the plateau, the endless white expanse around them, the cold biting through their furs, the dogs lying curled in the snow. We might imagine the quiet satisfaction they must have felt, knowing they had achieved something extraordinary. We might think of the long journey home that still lay ahead of them, the miles and miles of ice to cross, the dangers to face. Roald Amundsen succeeded because he understood that in nature, preparation defeats heroism, that knowledge is more valuable than courage, and that in the end, the Antarctic respects only those who respect it. His journey remains an inspiration, not because it was a tale of miraculous survival or tragic sacrifice, but because it was a story of competence and professionalism, triumphing over one of the most difficult challenges humans have ever undertaken. In the frozen silence of the South Pole, surrounded by a landscape that has remained unchanged for millions of years, Amundsen proved that with enough preparation and determination, humans can stand anywhere on Earth, even at the very bottom of our world. Picture them there, standing at the very bottom of the world, 5 small figures in an infinite landscape of white. The sun circles endlessly above them in the pale Antarctic sky, never setting, casting long shadows across the pristine snow. Their breath forms clouds of vapor that freeze instantly in the thin, cold air. The silence around them is absolute, broken only by the soft crunch of their boots on the ice and the occasional whine of a dog. This is a silence unlike any other on Earth, the silence of a place so remote that no sound from civilization, no echo of the busy world of men, can possibly reach it. They stand around the Norwegian flag they have planted, its fabric snapping in the gentle wind. Each man must be lost in his own thoughts, contemplating what they have accomplished, thinking of home, of the loved ones who await their return, of the warm fires and comfortable beds that seem impossibly distant now. Perhaps they think of all the steps that brought them here, every decision made, every hardship endured, every moment of doubt overcome. Perhaps they simply feel the profound strangeness of standing in a place where no human has ever stood before, where their footprints are the first ever made, where they are, quite literally, as far from human civilization as it is possible to be while remaining on Earth. The ice beneath their feet is miles deep, compressed snow and ice that has accumulated over millions of years. Beneath that ice lies a continent, a landmass larger than Europe, hidden under its frozen burden. The temperature around them is far below freezing, cold enough to kill an unprepared person in hours. Yet they stand there, warmly clothed in their carefully designed garments, well fed on their calculated rations, protected by the meticulous preparation that has defined every aspect of their journey. They are alive and strong at the South Pole because Amundsen understood that survival in such a place is not a matter of chance or heroism, but of knowledge and planning. As they begin their return journey, skiing north across the plateau, we might imagine the rhythm of their days. The wake in the cold tent, the lighting of the Primus stove, the slow melting of snow to make water for their morning drink, the careful packing of equipment, every item in its designated place, the harnessing of the dogs who shake themselves awake and stand ready, tails wagging, eager to pull. The first slide of skis on snow, the smooth glide northward, following their own tracks back toward safety. Day after day, they maintain their steady pace, covering the miles with practiced efficiency. The landscape around them never changes or seems not to change. It is always the same endless white, the same pale sky, the same hypnotic monotony. Yet they are moving, always moving, drawing closer to Framheim with each hour that passes. At night, in their tent, they speak of what they will do when they return. Perhaps Bjaaland talks of skiing competitions back in Norway. Perhaps Hansen speaks of his family. Perhaps Wisting describes the meals he dreams of eating. And perhaps Amundsen, their quiet leader, simply listens, allowing his men their dreams while he mentally calculates distances, checks their supplies, plans the next day's march. The descent of the Axel Heiberg Glacier, which was so difficult on the way up, proves treacherous on the way down. The sledges want to run away downhill, and the men must carefully brake them, controlling their descent. The dogs, sensing they are heading home, pull eagerly, almost too eagerly. But the men manage it all with the competence that has characterized their entire expedition. They navigate the crevasses, find the safe paths, lower the sledges down the steep sections, and then they are on the Ross ice shelf again, with nothing but flat ice between them and Framheim. We might imagine the moment when they first see their base camp on the horizon, a small dark shape against the white. How their pace might quicken despite their exhaustion. How the dogs might sense home and pull harder. How the men who remained at Framheim might spot them coming, tiny figures in the distance, and rush out to meet them. The reunion, the handshakes and embraces, the relief and joy, the return to the warm hut, to real beds, to the comfort and safety of their base, the feeling of completion, of a job well done, of having achieved something that will be remembered. Roald Amundsen succeeded because he understood that in nature, preparation defeats heroism, that knowledge is more valuable than courage, and that in the end, the Antarctic respects only those who respect it. His journey remains an inspiration, not because it was a tale of miraculous survival or tragic sacrifice, but because it was a story of competence and professionalism, triumphing over one of the most difficult challenges humans have ever undertaken. In the frozen silence of the South Pole, surrounded by a landscape that has remained unchanged for millions of years, Amundsen proved that with enough preparation and determination, humans can stand anywhere on Earth, even at the very bottom of our world. As you close your eyes tonight, perhaps you can feel the cold of that distant place, the bite of Antarctic wind on your cheeks, the crunch of snow beneath your boots. Perhaps you can imagine the satisfaction of achieving a long-held dream, of standing where no one has stood before, of proving that careful planning and respect for nature can overcome even the most daunting obstacles. Perhaps you can picture the Norwegian flag snapping in the wind at 90 degrees south, a small splash of color in an endless world of white. Think of those 5 men, skiing across the ice under the midnight sun, their shadows long before them, their goal behind them, their home ahead. Think of the dogs, loyal and strong, pulling their sledges across the frozen wasteland. Think of the hut at Framheim, waiting for them, warm and safe. Think of the Fram, that sturdy ship, ready to carry them back to civilization, back to the world of green trees and warm rain, and people who had no idea what they had achieved. The Antarctic continues its slow, eternal existence, unchanged by the brief visit of these men. The ice continues to accumulate, layer upon layer, year after year, century after century. The wind continues to blow across the polar plateau, scouring the surface, creating patterns in the snow that no one sees. The sun continues its strange dance, circling the sky in summer, disappearing entirely in winter. The continent sleeps beneath its burden of ice, dreaming whatever dreams continents dream, indifferent to the small dramas of human ambition played out on its surface. But somewhere in that ice, perhaps preserved forever in the cold, are the footprints of those 5 Norwegian explorers, the first human marks ever made at the South Pole. The proof that they were there, that they achieved what they set out to achieve, that they returned safely to tell the tale. Those footprints, long since covered by new snow, buried under layers of accumulated ice, remain as a testament to what careful preparation, skilled leadership, and unwavering determination can accomplish. And perhaps, as you drift into sleep, you carry with you the lesson of Amundsen's journey, that the greatest achievements often come not from dramatic heroics, but from patient preparation. That respect for nature and understanding of the environment are more valuable than any amount of courage alone. That success in difficult endeavors comes from doing countless small things correctly, from paying attention to details, from planning carefully and executing professionally. That the difference between triumph and tragedy in harsh environments is often simply a matter of making the right decisions, one after another, day after day, never wavering from what you know to be right. Sleep now, and dream of white horizons, of cold, clean air, of the satisfaction of a goal achieved, of a journey completed, of coming home. Dream of the peace that comes from knowing you have done something difficult and done it well. Dream of the Antarctic, that frozen wilderness at the bottom of the world, beautiful and terrible and eternal. Dream of 5 men standing at the South Pole, the first of all humanity to reach that distant place, standing in the cold and the silence and the endless white, planting their flag and claiming their victory, before turning north toward home, toward warmth, toward life, toward rest. And rest now yourself, peaceful in the knowledge that somewhere, always, the ice continues, the wind blows, the sun circles, and the world turns, carrying us all through the quiet darkness toward morning. Dream of the dogs, curled in the snow, their thick fur keeping them warm, their trust in their human companions complete. Dream of the sledges, loaded with supplies, runners gliding smoothly over the ice. Dream of the tent, that small shelter of canvas that was home in the wilderness. The Primus stove melting snow, the sleeping bags providing warmth, the quiet conversations in the evening before sleep. Dream of the vast plateau, stretching endlessly in all directions, untouched and pure, beautiful in its barren simplicity. Dream of the journey, not just the destination. Dream of the daily rhythm of travel, the same tasks performed day after day, until they become meditation, until thought and action merge into a flow state where time seems to pass differently. Dream of the satisfaction that comes from physical effort, from pushing your body, from feeling strong and capable and alive in your body. Dream of the clarity that comes from simplifying life to its essentials, from reducing needs to food and warmth and shelter and companionship. Dream of returning home, of the moment when the journey is complete, when you can rest knowing you have done well. Dream of the welcome from those who waited for you, who worried and hoped and believed in you. Dream of telling your story, of sharing your experience, of knowing that what you did matters, that it will be remembered. Dream of the quiet satisfaction that comes not from others' praise, but from your own knowledge that you set out to do something difficult, and you did it. And rest now yourself, peaceful in the knowledge that somewhere, always, the ice continues, the wind blows, the sun circles, and the world turns, carrying us all through the quiet darkness toward morning. The Antarctic endures, that great white continent at the bottom of the world, keeping its secrets, maintaining its frozen vigil, beautiful and remote, and utterly indifferent to human concerns. And perhaps that indifference is itself a kind of gift, a reminder that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that the universe existed long before us and will continue long after, and that our task is simply to live our lives as well as we can, with skill and preparation and respect for the world we inhabit. Sleep deeply now, and let the cold, clean air of the Antarctic fill your dreams. Let the silence of that distant place quiet your mind. Let the example of those explorers inspire you to face your own challenges with patience and skill. Let the rhythm of their journey, the steady progress day after day, remind you that great things are achieved through persistence. Let the success of their careful planning encourage you to prepare thoroughly for your own endeavors. And let the peace of the polar night, that long darkness that eventually gives way to dawn, remind you that rest and sleep are themselves important, necessary, valuable parts of life. Times when the body and mind can restore themselves, ready for whatever tomorrow brings. Good night, and may your dreams be as vast and peaceful as the Antarctic ice, as pure as its air, as enduring as its glaciers. May you rest well and wake refreshed, carrying with you the quiet strength of those who have done hard things and done them well.